Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the Geelang 85X 4K HD. Super hard to see down there, but those are 1204 5000 kV motors. HQ 2x2x4 props for your 4K recording as well as your FPV View. We have the Caddx Loris, which they created a mount for an ND filter. We've got a 2-board flight stack in there with the flight controller being F411. And not that you can see it, is a 12 amp 4-in-1 ESC. Mounted right here is the VTX, which goes from 25 milliwatts to 200 milliwatts, which has a circular polarized antenna attached to it. Mine is the FR Sky version, so the XM Plus is right down here. Also comes with Crossfire, Fly Sky, and Futaba. Got some pretty cool LEDs here on the backside. Rubber band to hold in your battery, with a foam pad here on the base plate. It weighs just over 78.25 grams. The recommended battery is a 450 milliamp 4S battery, which brings the weight up to about 130.25 grams. Motor post to motor post, I'm getting it just a touch under 85 millimeters. It comes with a spare frame and some foam tape to wrap around the frame to act as a bumper. We do get an extra canopy. We do get the Caddx control board so you can change settings on the Loris, as well as this mounting board if you were to want to take it out. A little cleaning cloth to keep your lens clean, a couple little tools, an extra rubber band for battery mounting, an extra set of props, and a mounting adapter which comes typically with the Loris. USB cable with an extra long nose, more bumper foam tape, receiver manual, a sheet with a QR code and a link to the manual, and it comes with a little carrying case with a handle. We've got a pretty calm day, but you will find near the end of the flight that there is some wind impact. Sometimes a breeze comes up. I live in a windy place. We're going to start off with a little bit of faster flight. Trying to mix the flight up a little bit in case you're not necessarily wanting to see just all cruising style, which maybe you enjoy, maybe you don't. Maybe you want to fly a little faster and want to see what the performance is like. I try to mix that all into one flight, although that doesn't give you a solid flight time for one particular style of flight. In this particular flight, we're going to find that it's about a 4-minute flight with, again, kind of mixed flying. We've got some slower cruising, we've got some faster cruising, or CineWhooping as you might call it, and we've got some more aggressive flight, all in that 4-minute segment. The first segment here is the faster flight, and this is going to last about 1 minute and 5 seconds, just so you can gauge that a little bit here. You can see that I've got some water in the yard. This was during a time where we had a lot of pop-up storms. We actually had some flooding that was relatively serious, manhole covers that were coming up, and spillways that were running full bore, and cars stuck in the road, some relatively severe summer weather. You know, it dissipates really quickly around here because it's so flat though. You know, if you get a bunch of rain, it usually finds its way down to the creeks and then it just runs off. It's just a matter of time. You know, the storms would rain for 2 hours and it would just rain heavy, several inches, and then a couple hours after the rain stops, most of the hazards would be gone. There'd be a few that would kind of linger around, but for the most part, not so much. Going over to my neighbor's yard where they have some interesting little environment to look at. We don't quite have the VTX range and the clarity in the FPV goggles in order to do the creek cruise that I've done with DJI stuff. But we make a little pass down there, something that's a little bit more visually interesting to look at than the back of the yard. Please note that if you're not familiar with these cameras, these specifically the 4K cameras that do the recording on board, this is not what we're seeing in the goggles. What we see in the goggles is much different, and please stick around to see that if you're looking at really anything with a 4K camera, whether it's a Caddx or a Runcam. I don't think Foxeer has one out yet. At least I'm not aware of Foxeer having one out yet. But the FPV View is much different. This is your onboard recording, which is pretty good. A little bump there off the ground as we cruise up that cable, just like we did in the last video that I had with the DJI. You're going to find at the end of this, I chose this flight because I think it's kind of funny. I struggle sometimes in this sort of CineWhooping, sort of smooth flying. I tend to want to get close to stuff, which is kind of my nature. But I also tend to crash when I'm moving relatively slow. I think I crash more when I'm moving slower than when I'm flying faster. And it's a strange thing, one of those quirks of me being me, I guess. But we're gonna make a pass as I go between the house and the table that I'm sitting at. And there's that tomato plant right there in that pot. I couldn't tell you how many times I hit that thing. It's ridiculous. I must have hit it, I would say 2/3 of the time I went by, I would hit that thing. A little bit is the FPV View. It's not easy to see, but I've got a good long run there. I get to line myself up for quite a while. It's not as though it's a difficult thing to do, but I hit that thing several times, and there you go. I hit the fence, and I'm going to do a little snap roll to celebrate not crashing. This does have a buzzer. I did not feature that in the quick roll, so that's something that some of you will appreciate because, you know, if you go down, you can activate that buzzer, or the buzzer will activate whenever the battery gets low. So that's something to audibly alert you to the fact that you need to come in if you maybe missed the warning on the OSD. again, when it comes to finding your models, that's something that we've gotten away from a little bit as we've really become kind of weight centric in some regards, that we don't see too many manufacturers including a buzzer anymore. And that little part that I went through the swing set, that's where you could kind of see the wind pushing me around. But we're going to come in now and finish up the flight, and then we're going to jump into the FPV view of this flight. So this is the FPV view, and those of you that aren't initiated to this stuff, you're probably going, what? This is just kind of how it is. On these 4K cameras, the FPV view is not very good. I've said it many times, I think the best FPV view on a single lens, dual purpose camera is probably the Runcam Nano Lite. And that's the one that came in the Mobula 6. That has the best view, but again, that's not 4K. In the last video that I did of 4K, I kind of asked some of you that, you know, why do you want to use a 4K rather than 1080p? And it had to do, I think, something that I gleaned from the comment section was the ability to maybe zoom in or use some sort of video stabilization software, so you had more data to work with in order to stabilize the footage a little better. And so that's one of the reasons that I picked up on why you want 4K. And I think to some people who have a very keen eye for video, 4K is also just something that they crave. They see the difference. I don't really see the difference between 1080p and 4K. But this is your FPV view. This is what you're looking at when you're in the goggles. You can see the OSD there. You can see the Caddx OSD from the Loris. You can remove the Loris OSD. The kit includes the cable as well as the control board. And I think that is a topic that I need to touch on a touch, because Geelang has been including a lot more accessories in theirs, whether it's batteries or replacement parts or repair parts in their kits than other manufacturers. So that's something that you should be aware of, and that when you look at the price point of the Geelang products, it's something to take into account, is that, you know, you've already got a spare frame and canopy, you've got spare props, you've got, I guess, a spare rubber band for your battery mounting, but you've got all the typical retail purchase accessories like the Caddx control board and like that little mounting board. This comes with a different flight stack than we typically see, and we do have the VTX, and you can see the VTX up there in the top right hand corner is running at 200 milliwatts. You'll note that when we started out on the table before we armed, that was only at 25. That's a setting in beta flight that kind of keeps the VTX from overheating if you happen to have it sitting powered on for too long before you take off in flight. But I think that's a pretty good sample of the FPV View. Surely you've seen enough to get a fix on what the camera is like from both its onboard 4K recording as well as what you see in the goggles. Let's go back to the desk and just talk about the quad a little bit more. So because I did hit that tomato plant canopy or pot, I broke this over here, and I kept flying it this way. I don't get too fussy about going to replacement parts when I've got a breakage, as long as it's not impacting what I see or feel on the sticks. What I see in the goggles and feel on the sticks, then I'll just continue to fly it. One of the reasons why I do that is it gives you a little bit more durability. Yes, it broke, but I don't know how many times I wanged into that pot or have been hit that fence and I didn't have any additional damage. So that should give you a data point to kind of judge the durability overall. Although I do think one of the things that surprised me a little bit was that this 3D print did not come off in any of my crashes. Because, you know, when I hit that pot, I had pretty solid. I mean, not necessarily dead on, but it stopped me in my tracks. Of course, I wasn't going full throttle or anything. But I was surprised that this stayed on. I didn't have to go looking for it or anything. So that's a pretty well-designed little feature. Let's take it off and take a little closer look. It's just a 3D print. We've got a little mount around the lens here. You can see that. And then we've got this mount, which this seems to be different material. This is a harder material. I think this is TPU, and this might be PLA or something else that's a little bit more harder. The camera angle changes quite easily, as you can see there as I just move it around. And you've got a fair bit of camera angle. If you wanted to really go some slower cruising, you pop that down. Or if you wanted to do some faster, more aggressive flight, you just push it back up. I did not tighten the screws on the camera for my purposes. It seemed to be fine. Also, as we're looking there, you can look at the wiring and how tidy it is and how far away from the props it is. The closest we get to the props is the power for the Caddx Loris right here. But I think they've done a pretty good job of making sure that provided you don't tumble through a tree or a bush or something that can possibly get in there and pull on those wires, that it should stay out of harm's way in most cases. But of course, with any of these micros, you know, you always need to give them a visual once over if you do fall out of a tree or a bush or something like that to make sure any wires didn't get pulled off. Right over here, you can see where we have our connector for the Cat Explorer. This is where you'd go in and you would change settings. The button on this is oddly kind of blocked. Where'd it go again? Oh, there it is. Let me get my pointer out. You probably can't hardly see it, but let me zoom in. This is the edge of the button, that little silver part, you know, that's the metallic part that secures the button to the board, and kind of behind the canopy is the actual button. You don't necessarily need to have access to that because these come set up to auto record, and then when you disconnect the battery, it saves the recording, so you don't have to worry about losing your recording. So that button isn't a huge deal, I would think, to most people, but if you were wondering where the button is, that's where it's at. And then of course we have our SD card slot right in here. Those two things do look to be touching. It's generally a non-issue. We've seen it time and time again to where the SD card kind of clip as well as the USB port are touching. Doesn't cause a problem. Could be a mounting issue though. If you don't have any clearance or you've got some pressure, you know, we've got soft mounting down here that could, oh no, this is a different stack. So we've got soft mounting up through the Whoop, or the 30.5 millimeter, and then this is a little bit smaller than that. So is that soft mounted? I can't quite tell if that's soft mounted down in there. They've got another board here on the outside, and then we've got our actual flight controller inside. No, I can't quite tell if that is soft mounted or not, but if it were to be soft mounted and you were touching, that could be an issue. Typically, you have to judge that by flight. The antennas for the receiver just kind of stuck out here. I didn't have a problem with this, but for maximum range, this wouldn't be ideal. You would want to have one coming out the back and then one pointing up high up top. You could use a zip tie and wrap it around this little section here and point it out back below the LEDs and route one of these antennas back there, and that would make it more ideal for range purposes if you wanted to do that. It does have that 200 milliwatt VTX, which in a big open space with the right environment should get you a fairly good range. It's also got crossfire available, so if you want to go with, well, I think what is widely considered the most reliable long-range receiver, crossfire would be the choice. I find that the Geelang motors are nice and smooth. They don't feel like they're grindy or anything after a number of flights. We've seen similar motors on a number of Geelang products. I think they might be made by the same people who are making motors for GEP-RC, because we've seen a very similar design for GEP-RC motors, and they look and feel the same to me. Oh, I forgot to mention there is a capacitor here on the battery lead, and let's see, can we read that? Well, I cannot read that, unfortunately. It's a pretty small capacitor. Now, I can't make out what I can see this text, but it doesn't necessarily show. It shows like the model of the capacitor. It doesn't necessarily show the voltage in microfarads that this capacitor is capable of carrying. The wiring here on the bottom is nice and tidy. You know, they've designed this frame with these little clips down in here so that all the wiring gets routed down in. And also note that these motors are soldered onto the ESC. You might not be able to see it, but down in here there's no connectors. Whoops, excuse me. There's no connectors. So depending upon whether you want connectors for motor replacement versus performance directly soldered on, just something to note. It does look like the frame probably had these sort of mounts on both the front and the back, and they've decided to clip those off the front. It looks like a pair of wire cutters were used just to snip off whatever's in the front. Not a big deal, but it's something I noticed, and I try to bring every little detail I can to the review so you can take note of them and factor in that in your purchase decision if you choose to check one out. It's well tuned. All I had to do was move the OSD elements around to where I like to have them, put my rates in, and I went out and flew it. So the setup is pretty quick. Of course, you do have to bind, and they put the receiver in the XM Plus case with the button right down here to bind. So pretty straightforward. Typically, when I get these sort of things, it doesn't take me more than about 15 to 20 minutes to get them set up so they're ready to fly the next day. Some people like me to talk about price point with these sorts of things so you don't have to go look. So I've remembered to do it now. Without a receiver, this comes in at $185.99. With the XM Pluses, I have it, it's $201.99. With Crossfire, it is $114.99. FlySky is $193.99. And finally, if you choose to get the AC900 receiver, which does Futaba as well as FrSky, it's $193.99. So that's your price point. I will have a link down in the video description to the site where you can take a look at all the specs, see if there's anything I missed. You can see the kit and all of its glory, as well as any sales they might be running, or if it's even in stock. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the comments section below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.